On the show this week, we've got an exclusive drive on Indian roads of the second generation Range Rover Evoque. Plus, we pit the Benelli Imperiale 400 against the Jawa 42 and the Royal Enfield Classic.
Now, you're sure this is a Range Rover? It says so on the bonnet. But what is it? Is this an updated Velar? Well, look a bit closer and yeah, this is actually the all-new Evoque, and we have it here exclusively in India, nice and early. This is the D180S version, and we have it for the day to see what it offers. So first up, those stunning lines. Less hardy Land Rover and more la-di-da fashion icon, the new Evoque gets people's attention wherever it goes. And that it looks like the stunning Velar does its prospects no harm at all. And truth be told, it is difficult to tell the two apart. Both get similar mesh grills, slimline headlights with rectangular LED inserts, headlight extensions that run onto the front doors, severely tapering rooflines, and steeply rising belt lines. So size apart, how do you tell one from the other? Especially if all you get is a quick glance. Well, it's not simple. The new Evoque uniquely gets an additional slot-like opening under the front grille. The bonnet line predominantly runs around the big front wheel arch, and well, frankly, that's it. It's also similar looking to many Range Rovers on the inside. So on the inside of the new Evoque, and no big surprises here, but what you do get is plenty of quality, like this soft touch top of the dash, these brackets here in chrome, the highlight, the piano black, all beautifully built. The vents here, the controllers have chrome piping and dashes. This is this new material which does look pretty good. Now, you have a touchscreen, but this one below on this S trim version is the touch controller. The two control wheels placed on the center console function superbly. The dials can be used for several modes which you can select. However, I don't like the fact that you need to swap modes to control fan speed, which is a pain if you are driving and want to keep your eyes on the road. I particularly like the hooded Cobra-like instrument panel cowl, and I also like how the feather touch steering wheel controls can be reconfigured. While the version on test, the S gets regular dials and only one touchscreen, the higher spec SE gets an additional touchscreen, an all digital instrument panel, a clear sight mirror, and an uprated sound system with 14 speakers and a dual channel subwoofer. Slick operation and a high level of functionality also seem to be extremely important. There's no rotary dial gear lever this time around. Still, must say I do like the soft tray above the cup holders where you can keep your phone, and that the individual elbow rest splits down the center, and seat comfort on the front chairs is seriously good. Compared to the earlier Evoque, this one has a wheelbase that's longer by 20 mm, so legroom at the rear is a bit better. Now this isn't the ideal car to be chauffeur driven around in, and that's of course because of this sloping roof, but actually Range Rover played it smartly. Headroom is pretty decent unless you're of course 6 foot or taller than that. This sunroof here, normally they impinge on your headroom, but the sunroof has after this sort of curve here, so you have a pretty fair amount of headroom. Legroom isn't too bad, and the back support and thigh support is pretty decent. Yes, your knees are a bit up and you would want a bit more space in a car of this price, but all things considered, I'm pretty comfortable here. Seating 3 abreast in the back, however, isn't a good idea. The cabin is a bit narrow, and then visibility out the back isn't very good either. Since a large percentage of Evoques are owner-driven, it's important that it drives well too. First up, however, the ride. Now over some of the sharper bumps, you do feel the stiffness in the springs. But in general, once you up the speed of the car, ride does flatten out pretty nicely. The tall springs seem to work better now, the dampers round off bumps nicely, and then what impresses is that the faster I travel over this patchwork highway, the more comfortable the Evoque feels. Yes, the new Evoque has a roughly 20 mm longer wheelbase, and that could nix some of the earlier car's agility. But the new platform on which it's built also has a new floor pan that improves rigidity by around 17%. Now the Evoque has always been a bit of a sporty handler, and this new Evoque also is pretty good. Nice balance going into corners, the steering weighs up nicely, and though it isn't as agile as the earlier car, not quite, it does feel pretty fun around the corners. Also, what I absolutely love is how neatly and quickly it tucks in if you find yourself running a bit wide. The Evoque is also very comfy at high speed. Also extremely impressive is high speed stability. This car just feels as solid as a rock and gives you tremendous confidence. And what I also particularly like are these brakes. They're super. If not in too much of a hurry, the diesel engine also works pretty well. At low and medium speeds, this Ingenium 2-litre diesel, the 180 horsepower version, is smooth and pulls pretty well from a low speed. This is because it has a variable geometry turbo that aids low speed performance. And put your foot down, and the mid-range is pretty strong too. And what makes it perform this well is all the torque. The Evoque clearly isn't for everyone, and definitely not for those who believe size and price are directly proportional. A luxury SUV designed and built for a more evolved car buyer, someone who's been there and done that, it clearly is built with different objectives in mind. Here, compactness is a virtue, attitude, stance and style matter more than practicality, and what separates this luxury SUV from its rivals is that owners often drive themselves. Yes, the ride could have been a bit more comfortable at low speed, a bit more power and performance would be nice, and it isn't nearly as well equipped as it should be considering its expected price of around 50 lakhs. Do remember, however, that the better equipped SE version is available for not all that much more, and for those interested in more power and performance, there's also the 249 horsepower petrol, the P250. Closer in price to rivals a full size up like the BMW X3 and the Audi Q5, the new Evoque clearly isn't a car you buy with your head. But then the Evoque has always been an emotional choice.
The Imperiale is a brand new product and it's based on a completely unknown platform. What is clear though is that this motorcycle has been modelled on the very same idea of the insanely popular Royal Enfield Classic 350. In fact, you could argue that the Royal Enfield success is also the reason behind the rebirth of Jawa. There are literally millions of customers out there who find these easy riding motorcycles hugely appealing, and therefore the big question is whether these newcomers can meet the expectations from the segment. So what we're going to do is model today's comparison around the things that customers in this segment value the most. And in that respect, design and road presence rank very high up.
Since the Royal Enfield Classic is such an incredibly popular motorcycle, I'm not going to waste your time telling you about what it looks like. Instead, we'll discuss what the other two look like next to it. And two things stand out here. First of all, the Benelli is noticeably larger, whereas the Jawa is more compact. The second thing is that the Benelli doesn't really wear a design that makes you go wow, whereas the Jawa definitely does.
We have the slightly more modern Jawa 42 here because that's the model that customers seem to be preferring. But choosing between the standard Jawa and the 42 only comes down to small differences in the riding position and which design you prefer. To our eyes, the 42 has very elegant proportions, and the only thing that sticks out is the rear fender that quite literally sticks out too far from the tire. Step closer and you'll see that the Jawa has the best attention to detail as well. Its engine is beautifully designed and makes it a vital part of the overall look along with the slim dual exhaust pipes. The Imperiale meanwhile carries a likable but fairly anonymous design. Where it scores is that its sheer size gives it great road presence. Sitting on the Imperiale gives the rider a commanding king of the road feel, just like the Royal Enfield does, whereas the Jawa simply feels smaller and less consequential in comparison. As far as quality goes, even though the Benelli lacks any flashy components, quality levels all round seem quite decent, although this was a brand new motorcycle. The Classic and the Jawa had covered less than 3,000 kilometers when we got them, but both were showing disappointing signs of corrosion in some areas, and the Jawa's instrument gauge would build condensation every time it encountered some water. Fantastic quality and finish, therefore, are not something to expect from this segment just yet.
Good looks are important for sure, but customers in this segment aren't a very aggressive bunch when it comes to their riding styles. And for them, things like comfort and practicality are far more important than outright performance and handling.
Let's start with the riding positions. The Enfield and the Benelli seat you in very retro and very comfy upright positions. The Jawa 42 meanwhile introduces a slight amount of lean forward to a wide handlebar, and I quite like this. What I can't get over though is the Jawa's foot peg position. These are more rear set than the other two, which isn't a problem, but I find that the distance between the seat and the foot pegs is too short, which makes things cramped when you spend long hours on the bike. The Jawa's very low seat height will certainly make it more accessible, but this compromises comfort for tall riders. Another issue with the foot peg placement is that your footwear will eventually scuff up those pretty side panels. Coming to the seat, the Jawa's is far too thin and soft, and it gets painful within the first half hour. It's also the smallest here for a pillion, and the side-mounted grab handles are awkward to hold. In comparison, the Benelli and the RE have decent seat heights as well, but both are more spacious and practical, although I prefer the Benelli's rider seat over longer distances. Another aspect that will certainly matter to buyers in this segment is how hot the engines run in heavy traffic, and the Jawa and Benelli radiate noticeably more heat than the Royal Enfield, although neither gets too uncomfortable.
The compact Jawa scores the lowest when it comes to things like comfort and convenience, but it makes up for it when it comes to the engine.
This is where you will find the biggest differentiator on these machines. The Royal Enfield has the only motor here that still uses a 2-valve pushrod design, whereas the other two have moved to an overhead camshaft layout with 4-valve heads. In fact, the Jawa goes all out in its quest for performance, and despite what those pretty engine fins may suggest, this is the only one to feature liquid cooling, and it gets a double overhead camshaft design as well as a 6-speed gearbox. The specifications don't come as a surprise then, because the Royal Enfield and Benelli are quite close in terms of power and torque, but the Jawa is miles ahead, although its figures come in at higher RPMs.
The Royal Enfield's old-school engine design results in a very old-school riding experience, one that's dominated by awesome low-end torque that's available as soon as you let go of the clutch. That makes the Classic really easy and quite a pleasure to ride at slow city speeds, and in that respect, neither of these two come close.
The Classic's low end is so usable that I found myself enjoying riding this bike in congested city conditions the most. It also has a tight turning radius, and the handlebar takes little effort to steer, which is quite surprising considering that it's much heavier than the Jawa. When the traffic is light and flowing, the lightweight Jawa is a joy, but if you try and ride it lazily at low revs like the other two, you'll probably end up stalling the engine. The Benelli doesn't have as strong a bottom end as the Enfield, but it's much better than the Jawa, and this bike enjoys being ridden in a relaxed fashion. It's decent in the city as well, but you will feel the weight, and the turning circle isn't great either. When the speeds rise, things fall apart for the Royal Enfield. Vibrations become aggressive when you try to rev the engine, and 80 kph is the maximum cruising speed that you can hold on the highway without fears of your hands being vibrated clean off. The Jawa is the exact opposite, and its engine is at its most entertaining when revved out. The acceleration is brisk thanks to the smooth shifting gearbox and its short ratios. Top speed is about 130 kph, but the downside of that gearing is that the engine is revving high, anything upwards of 100 kph, so it isn't exactly what you'd call a relaxed cruising machine. As for the Imperiale, it finds a happy middle ground here too. The 5-speed gearbox feels quite basic with long throws in between the gears, but vibrations are much lower than the Classic, and it can surge up to about 100 kph without too much fuss. Crucially though, the engine oozes that relaxed long stroke feeling, which means that you'll enjoy covering the miles at a gentle pace. As far as outright speed goes, it's much quicker than the Royal Enfield, but no match for the Jawa.
When it comes to handling and the sheer fun factor of riding through a set of corners, it's a similar story as with the engines, and it's the Jawa that's the most eager to play.
With a crisp feeling chassis and not much weight to go around, the Jawa enjoys encountering a winding ribbon of tarmac. It's no aggressive street naked and it will eventually run out of cornering clearance, but the bike feels capable and confident when pushed. The same can't be said for the other two, especially the Royal Enfield, which starts to feel squishy and uncomfortable closer to the limit. In normal riding conditions, the Jawa suspension setup is nicely balanced, but that painful seat makes it feel far firmer than it actually is. As for the Royal Enfield, well, it definitely isn't a sharp handler, but it packs the most absorptive suspension here, and the bike eats through whatever you throw at it, come Ladakh or Lokhandwala. The Benelli also has a similarly soft and squishy front end, and it's quite comfy in most situations, but the rear shocks are firm and things can get a little bouncy if you encounter long stretches of bad roads. All three run on nice tyres with TVS Remoras on the Benelli and MRFs on the other two. Braking performance is decent as well, and the days of endless jokes about unstoppable Royal Enfields are long gone. Although it should be said that the Benelli's adjustable brake lever sticks too far out, which makes it my least favourite here, although the actual performance is not bad at all.
The key thing that all three bikes are trying to provide here is a retro experience, and that's given the manufacturers the license to offer you as little as possible when it comes to features, although the Benelli is the best in this regard.
All three wear tube tyres on their pretty spoked wheels, but the RE is the worst off because it doesn't even offer a fuel gauge, and you have to make do with just a low fuel warning light. The Jawa does one better and it gets a basic fuel gauge, but that small digital gauge only shows the odometer reading and there is no trip information. The Imperiale meanwhile has 2 trip meters and it will even tell you what gear you're in and what time it is. For all their differences, these bikes are priced very close to each other. The Royal Enfield Classic 350 range starts at Rs 1.46 lakhs for the base X model with single channel ABS. But the Signals model we have here gives you dual channel ABS and a special paint scheme for Rs 1.64 lakh. The single channel ABS Jawa 42 you see in our review costs Rs 1.55 lakh, but if you want the dual channel model, that will cost you an identical Rs 1.64 lakh. And finally, the Imperiale bucks the trend of small Benellis being too expensive because this one costs a competitive Rs 1.69 lakh ex showroom. Price is clearly not going to be a deciding factor in the verdict here. In fact, there are a lot of other factors to consider, so let's begin with the Royal Enfield. The Classic 350 kick-started the retro revolution in India 10 years ago, and its incredible success story is the reason why this comparison is even happening today at all. The Classic offers the most authentic old-school experience, and you could also say that it's the most characterful bike here as well. But all that old-world charm brings far too many compromises, and this is the bike that's most desperately due for an overhaul. The good news is that Royal Enfield is hard at work on this as we speak, and a brand new 350 platform should debut sometime next year. If the Interceptor 650 is any indication, that new bike is going to give its rivals plenty to sweat about.
But for now, we move to the Jawa. This is clearly the fastest and most advanced motorcycle here, and if you crave a retro-looking motorcycle that rides like a modern machine, this is the bike for you. At the same time, the Jawa simply cannot offer that lazy, torque-dominated riding experience that tens of thousands of customers seem to crave every month.
The bigger problem, however, is Jawa's waiting periods. Deliveries have only started to begin in earnest in just the last month or so, and as we understand it, there is still quite a long waiting period for some of the models. And that's where the issue lies, because the company has been absolutely unwilling to share any forms of data, whether it's bookings, production, or sales numbers. And that doesn't create much confidence.
And that leaves us with the Imperiale.
Benelli has done a great job in its first attempt in this segment. The Imperiale is not without its flaws, but in this company, it manages to achieve the best balance between old-school emotions and decent levels of performance and refinement.
The Imperiale 400 does the best job in this trio in offering the kind of riding experience that customers in this segment are after. Of course, Benelli still has a lot of work to do in terms of expanding the dealer network and reducing after-sales costs. But I'm fairly certain that this is the bike that will finally get them there.
And now it's time for tips on sustainability and protecting the environment with Servo Futura G Plus from Indian Oil. Choose a smaller car if you don't need the size and space. Overloading the car with weight makes it work harder.